I've always been interested in gardening, even as a kid. It started when my mom got me this adorable playhouse for my 7th birthday. I spent countless hours in there, playing make-believe and hosting tea parties with my stuffed animals. The plan was always to keep it for my future kids, but Mother Nature had other ideas. When I was around 12, a series of brutal storms left the playhouse pretty beat up. It wasn't safe for playing anymore, but I couldn't bear to tear it down. That's when I got the idea to turn it into something new. I just started getting into gardening and thought, why not make it into a greenhouse? I spent weeks researching different types of roses and decided on English roses because of their full blooms and incredible fragrance. It took a lot of trial and error, but over the next few years, those roses transformed my old playhouse into something magical. The roses grew up and around it, making it look like this enchanted cottage you'd find in a fairy tale. The red blooms were absolutely stunning when they were in full bloom. Our house was right next to this small apartment complex, and their balconies had a clear view into our backyard. I guess that's how this whole mess started. One morning there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, there was this man standing there with this weird smile on his face. He immediately started complimenting my roses, saying how beautiful they were in full bloom. I was really proud of my garden, so naturally I smiled and thanked him. He asked a few questions about how I maintained them, and I happily explained everything, thinking he might want to start his own garden. After a moment of awkward silence, I asked if there was anything else he wanted to know. That's when he told me he was hoping to take some of my roses to make a bouquet for his wife. I politely declined, explaining that I worked hard on them and only cut them during necessary pruning for maintenance. He seemed to understand and left politely enough. I didn't think much of it until I got home from school that afternoon. As I walked toward our house, I froze. There he was in my backyard, butchering my roses with what looked like kitchen scissors. I ran into the yard, screaming at him to stop and demanding to know why he would do this to my roses. He looked at me like I was the one who'd lost my mind, casually reminding me that he'd told me he wanted some for his wife. I started carefully picking up the cut roses, trying not to get pricked by the thorns, and told him I was going to call the police. He smugly replied that he'd call them himself, bragging about being close friends with most of the department. I grabbed whatever stems I could salvage and ran inside. True to his word, he actually did call the police, but he told them I was harassing him and claimed he had permission to take the roses. Since I was still in high school, the police called my mom at work. She rushed home not knowing anything about my conversation with the man that morning since she'd left for work before I went to school. When the police officer asked for my side of the story, I explained everything while my mom tried to comfort me. That's when the man made his biggest mistake. He claimed he had permission from my older brother. I stopped crying immediately and looked at my mom. We both burst out laughing. The police officer scolded us for being disrespectful and demanded to know what was so funny. My mom, between fits of laughter, explained that she knew for certain the man hadn't spoken to my older brother. When the officer asked why she was so sure, I delivered the punchline. I was an only child. He turned bright red and started stammering about some misunderstanding, but the police officer wasn't having any of it. They arrested him right there for trespassing and destruction of property. The apartment complex evicted him and his wife after this incident, and we later found out he'd been lying to his wife about buying roses from a local florist for months. She was mortified when she learned the truth and actually came by to apologize, and my roses recovered beautifully. I'm your typical nerdy guy who loves anime, video games, and anything related to geek culture. After serving in the army, I had grand plans to travel the world, but a certain global health crisis put those dreams on hold. So I ended up moving back in with my parents, renting my old room at the back of their house. My father is this quiet, reserved, 76-year-old retiree who wouldn't hurt a fly, while my mother is his complete opposite, loud, cheerful, and fiercely protective of her family. Little did I know that their peaceful retirement was about to be disrupted by the most ridiculous situation imaginable. It started as a regular rest day from my calisthenics training. I was in my room watching YouTube and browsing Reddit when I heard shouting from the front of the house. Then my mother's voice rang out calling for me to come quickly because someone was yelling at my father. I rushed outside to find this bald guy screaming his head off at my father. I asked my dad what was going on, but before he could answer, the bald guy started yelling, claiming I was the guy who had been in the passenger seat. Confused, I asked my dad again what was happening. My father explained that this man was accusing him of throwing plastic bottles onto his lawn from the car, something he knew nothing about. I asked the bald guy if this accusation was true, and he insisted it was, claiming I had been there too. He stepped closer to us in the front yard, mockingly commenting about me being a big man coming to get him. I told him he was on private property, screaming at the homeowner. The guy then threw a plastic bottle in our direction, insisting it had come from our car and telling us not to play dumb. I pointed out that this was impossible since I hadn't left the house in 2 days. This threw him off for a moment, but he quickly recovered and continued his tirade. He got closer, fists clenched. I asked him to please step back, to which he responded aggressively, asking what I was going to do about it. My mother intervened, threatening to call the police for trespassing. The guy took off his sunglasses and threw them into his car, challenging us to a fight and threatening to come back and throw trash on our lawn. My mother announced she was calling the cops. Then his wife, who had been quietly watching this whole scene, finally spoke up, suggesting that maybe we weren't the ones responsible and trying to get her husband to leave before the police were called. The bald guy kept insisting it was us, even as the whole neighborhood watched the scene unfold. His wife apologized, admitting it might have been the wrong car. She then told her husband to get in the car, threatening to leave him to walk home if he didn't comply. He finally got into their pickup truck, but not before giving us one last death stare. My father, in a moment of perfect calm, suggested he might want to see a psychiatrist. After they left, we filed a police report, especially since the guy had threatened violence against us. We discovered they lived just 2 streets away. He had actually followed my father home over a plastic bottle. When the police contacted them, his wife apologized again for the scene, but the bald guy had already filed his own statement, claiming he was defending his home and that we shouldn't litter. He even made more threats against us, which prompted my father to press charges. The police investigation revealed security camera footage from multiple houses showing the real litterer. Turns out it was a teenager in a similar white car who had been going around throwing trash in various yards. The bald guy was charged with harassment, trespassing, and making threats. He ended up having to do community service, including, you guessed it, picking up litter around the neighborhood. I moved into our house when I was around 5 years old. The neighbors seemed nice at first. You know how it goes. They'd wave, smile, bring over cookies, the whole 9 yards. I had grown up with our family dog who my dad had gotten before I was even born. She was this gentle soul, barely barked, mostly just wanted to lounge in the sun and get belly rubs. About a year after we moved in, our old girl passed away. That's when everything changed with the neighbors, though we didn't realize it at first. A few months after losing our first dog, my parents decided we were ready for another one. We adopted this beautiful rescue pup. She was protective, definitely more vocal than our previous dog. Whenever someone walked past our house or if a loud car drove by, she'd bark to let us know. We worked on training her, but being a rescue, she had her own past traumas we were helping her work through. One evening, we went to have dinner with my grandmother. It was just my mom, my 2 younger siblings, both 5 at the time, and me since Dad was away on a business trip. We were only gone for about 45 minutes, but when we pulled up to our house, there was a police car parked outside. I remember my stomach dropping when I saw our neighbor standing there, pointing at our car and screaming like a banshee. My mom quickly explained to the officer that we had only been gone for 45 minutes to have dinner with my grandmother, and that she had accidentally left the dog outside. She asked me to bring the dog in. I ran inside to get our dog while the neighbor, let's call her Karen, kept ranting about how we supposedly left our horrible dog outside for hours, claiming it wouldn't stop barking. The police officer actually seemed pretty reasonable. He stood there calmly while Karen had her meltdown and explained that he'd been there for 10 minutes and only heard the dog bark when he approached the fence. Karen demanded that he give us a ticket and take our dog away, then made a cruel comment about our previous dog being quieter and sweeter, implying we had gotten rid of her. That last comment felt like a knife to my heart. I was 9 at the time and losing our first dog was still raw. I ran inside crying, but I didn't want to scare my siblings, so I told them I had tripped and hurt myself. I hugged our dog tight, terrified they were going to take her away. My mom, though, she wasn't having any of Karen's nonsense. She confronted Karen about her insensitive comments, explaining angrily that we hadn't gotten rid of our previous dog. She had died, and we were all still grieving. She told Karen to stop screaming such horrible things around her children. Karen just kept insisting she was telling the truth and demanded the officer do something about our nuisance dog. The officer simply told Karen to go back inside and have a good night. After she stormed off, he had a private conversation with my mom. He confided that Karen's house had called them so many times about us and other neighbors that they had started ignoring their calls. He explained he only came tonight because he was already in the area and just asked my mom to remember to bring the dog in before leaving. My mom expressed her understanding and thanked him for being reasonable. The officer kindly suggested she check on me and wished her a good night. That wasn't the end of Karen's crusade against our dog. For the next several years, she called animal control, the police, and even tried to get other neighbors to complain about our dangerous animal. But here's the sweet part. When she finally moved away 3 years ago, we found out she'd been making similar complaints about 5 other neighbors' pets. The whole street had a block party the weekend after she left. The family that moved in after her has 3 dogs who love to play with ours through the fence. After 15 years working as a software developer for various tech companies, I finally landed my dream job at a major tech firm in Orlando. The position came with better pay and more flexibility, which meant my wife and I could finally move out of our apartment in Celebration, Florida, and into a nice condo closer to downtown. We'd been in that apartment for 3 years, and while it wasn't terrible, the management had always been a bit difficult. My wife and I both work in tech. She's a systems analyst, and I specialize in automation solutions. We're the kind of people who appreciate efficiency and logical thinking, which is probably why what happened next bothered us so much. The move itself went smoothly. We cleaned everything, repaired minor damages, and waited for our final bill. When it came, we paid it promptly, thinking that would be the end of our relationship with the apartment complex. Then one day, while I was debugging some code at work, my wife called. She could barely contain her laughter as she told me about another bill we'd received from the apartment complex. When I asked her how much it was for, she revealed the absurd amount, 2 cents. She pointed out the ridiculous fact that they had spent 50 cents on postage just to bill us for 2 cents. We both burst out laughing. As programmers, we were familiar with these kinds of system oversights, edge cases where the software doesn't account for ridiculously small amounts. I told her not to worry about it, saying I'd stop by the office on my way home since it was right on my route anyway. I grabbed 2 pennies from our change jar at home and headed to the apartment complex office the next day. The manager was sitting at her desk typing away with that same stern expression I remembered from our 3 years there. I greeted her and explained I was there to pay my final bill. She asked if I had my statement with me. I confirmed that I did, showing her the bill and mentioning that I had the 2 pennies ready if she wanted them. The manager flatly told me that they don't take cash. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I tried to lighten the mood by pointing out how funny the situation was. I explained that the system had obviously missed catching such a tiny amount and suggested we write it off since it would cost them more to process any kind of payment than the 2 cents they were trying to collect. She refused to write it off. Another painful silence followed. I asked her, somewhat incredulously, if she really wanted me to write and mail a check for 2 cents and if they would actually process such a check. She confirmed that yes, that's exactly what she wanted, and they would indeed process it. Without another word, she stood up and walked back into her office, closing the door behind her. That's when something in me snapped. If she wanted to be petty, I could be pettier. I went home and did two things. First, I set up an automatic monthly payment to the apartment complex for 3 cents. Then, I wrote a script that would generate and send a monthly postcard through an online service. These weren't ordinary postcards, they were massive billboard-sized monstrosities, 18 by 24 inches, each one saying the same thing. I apologize for my overpayment of 1 cent. Please issue me a refund check for this amount. The first postcard went out, then the second. Each one probably cost more to process than the original 2 cents they wanted from me. I was prepared to keep this going for months. Then, exactly 1 month later, my phone rang. The regional manager introduced himself and mentioned he was calling about my unique situation. What followed was the most groveling apology I've ever heard. He practically begged me to stop sending the postcards and assured me that the 2-cent charge had been written off. He even offered to send me a gift card for my trouble, which I politely declined. I explained to him that all I had wanted was for someone to acknowledge how ridiculous this situation was. He assured me that they'd had a long talk with a local manager about using better judgment in these situations, promising that this would never happen again. I canceled the automatic payments and the postcard script. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making someone realize just how absurd they're being. And if it takes writing a custom script and spending a few hours of your time to do it, well, sometimes that's just worth it.